One of the most acclaimed streaming series of recent memory, FX's Shogun, was based on a 1975 novel by author James Clavell. That same book previously inspired a memorable 1980 TV miniseries that was also well received. If your dad watched the History Channel in the 90s, you probably saw the gigantic VHS box set somewhere on his shelf. But what you might not have realized is that both the book and subsequent two miniseries were rooted in real Japanese history and provide a solid, though fictionalized, chronicle of the formation of the actual Tokugawa Shogunate. So, today we're unpacking everything that really happened in Japan after the end of Shogun. But first, make sure you subscribed to the Weird History channel. After that, jump on down to the comments and let us know what other Japanese history you want to hear about. All right, gang, time to keep Ronin. Clavell's novel Shogun is historical fiction, emphasis on the second word. But its central relationship between a European sailor and a powerful feudal lord facing a political crisis takes inspiration from the real story of English navigator William Adams and his time as an advisor to Japanese feudal lord Tokugawa Ieyasu. The book's setting also reflects the real history of Japan at the dawn of the 17th century, at the close of what's known as the Sengoku period. The Sengoku, also known as the Warring States period, was a century of political and social upheaval in Japan. The central authority of the Ashikaga Shogunate was in decline, and regional feudal lords were taking advantage of the power vacuum to expand their spheres of influence, often sparking violent conflicts and rivalries. Against this backdrop, a few leaders who later became known as Great Unifiers brought an end to these conflicts by centralizing their power and gradually replacing the Ashikaga Shogunate with something new. One of these unifiers was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a former samurai who came from a peasant background but rose in power until he was essentially Japan's de facto ruler, although he never attained the formal title of shogun. In 1598, with his health failing, Hideyoshi selected a council of 5 elders who would rule the nation until his 5-year-old son, Hideyori, was old enough to take his place. The most powerful member of the new council was Lord Tokugawa Ieyasu, who ruled over the Edo province. Also in 1598, 34-year-old Englishman William Adams set sail for the east from Rotterdam along with a company of Dutch merchants and his brother, Thomas. It was an exceptionally difficult journey. During a resupply stop on the African island of Cape Verde, half the crew caught a deadly fever, which killed the expedition's leader, Admiral Jacques Mahu. That tends to cast a shadow on the whole trip. By the time they reached present-day Argentina, the men were starving, with some reduced to eating their leather clothing and gear. Even more crew members died from exposure due to freezing temperatures in the extreme south. Finally, in September of 1599, the Dutch ships reached the Pacific Ocean. On April 19, 1600, after 19 months at sea, the journey's 23 total survivors, out of more than 100 men who started out together, anchored off the island of Kyushu, Japan. All of them at this point were sick or already dying. Only 9 crew members, in fact, were able to stand under their own power upon reaching Japan. Their remaining cargo consisted of 11 chests of goods and a cache of weapons. Just don't ask them about the delicious leather. As depicted in the series, the only Westerners currently residing in Japan were Portuguese Jesuit missionary priests, who served as interpreters for Adams and his crewmates. Fearful of international competition for Japanese favor and attention, the Jesuits told their hosts that Adams and his crew were pirates and recommended a death sentence for all. Adams and a merchant named Jan Josten van Loderstein were sent to Osaka, where they met with the powerful lord of Edo province, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Over the course of 3 meetings with Adams, Ieyasu was able to determine that he had deep knowledge of ships and navigation and would be more valuable as a living ally than an executed prisoner. Ieyasu sent Adams to Edo, where he trained the lord's army to use the cannons he had brought along on his ship. Once a power struggle developed between Ieyasu and other members of the Elder Council, Adams actually served with Ieyasu's army in Aizu and later fought in the decisive Battle of Sekigahara that brought an end to the military conflict. Following his victory at Sekigahara, Ieyasu cemented his control over Japan by rewarding the men who had stood by him with land and titles. Honda Masanobu, the real Ieyasu ally who inspired Kashigi Yabushige in Shogun, was one of these lords. Unlike the character's untimely death in the book and series, The real Masanobu went on to become governor of Sado, who remained an important Ieyasu ally. Ieyasu also stripped holdings from his enemies, revoking many of the land rights held by the former leader's still young son, Hideyori. Another important step in Ieyasu securing his power was changing his family name. While he'd originally been identified with the Minamoto clan, it was decided that claiming descendants from the Fujiwara clan made a better case for his rise to central power. So Ieyasu started fabricating elements of his family history. And hey, who hasn't embellished a bit during a job interview? In March of 1603, Ieyasu was formally named Shogun by Emperor Goyoze. What's the difference between an emperor and a shogun? Great question. Essentially, the emperor was the supreme leader of Japan, with a deity-approved right to rule. The shogun was more like a prime minister, the head of the state on the ground, actually running things day to day. But even after years of conflict and campaigning, Tokugawa Ieyasu only technically remained in the role of shogun for 2 years. In 1605, he retired from the position and allowed his son and heir, Tokugawa Hidetada, to take over. Behind the scenes, it's likely this was a strategic move, not only freeing the elder Tokugawa from ceremonial duties, but also helping to cement the transition of power to his son. He essentially continued running the country for the next decade, until his death in 1616. Though Ieyasu's efforts in the years after Sekigahara had done much to establish him as the most powerful lord in Japan, earning the title of shogun did not entirely bring an end to his opposition. Just as depicted in the series, not all of Japan's feudal lords felt that Ieyasu was the right man for the job, or that his rise was even legitimate. Many continued to throw their support behind the former leader's son, Toyotomi Hideyori, who was still living in Osaka with his mother. In 1614, the Toyotomi clan rebuilt Osaka Castle, establishing themselves as a potential threat to the shogun's power. The Tokugawas responded by marching their troops on Osaka in an assemblage that included Honda Masanobu and his son Honda Masazumi. An army led by Ieyasu's son, the formal shogun Tokugawa Hidetada, destroyed the new Osaka castle in 1615, prompting Hideyori and his mother to take their own lives. The Tokugawas then had all of their remaining living heirs executed, permanently ending the Toyotomi clan, and the final threat to the shogun's legitimacy. Sort of like the baptism montage in The Godfather, only way more harsh. Both William Adams and his fellow merchant, Jan Josta von Lodestein, continued to serve the Tokugawa clan throughout this period. It wasn't until 1611, more than a decade after his arrival in Japan, that Adams heard of a British East India Company ship docked in Indonesia. He was able to write to them and finally convey news to his family back in England that he was still alive. Adams was not formally granted the right to leave Japan and return home until 1613, though it's unclear if he'd ever made this request or was simply enjoying the new life he'd established for himself. Thanks to his service to Tokugawa, Adams had been granted the Japanese name Miura Anjin. He was given land around Edo and had been licensed to trade and run his own business. Though he already had a wife and child waiting for him back in England, Adams married a Japanese woman and they had 2 more kids. In 1613, the English captain John Serres arrived in Japan on his ship the Clove, hoping to establish a trading post for the English East India Company. Tokugawa Ieyasu granted Adams the right to return to England along with Serres and his crew. But after spending so many years in Japan, he had trouble relating to the English sailors and decided not to go back after all. Adams remained in Japan for the rest of his life, earning a living by helping European powers, including the Dutch and the British, establish trade partnerships in the East. He worked as a fixer, translator, and negotiator, and as a Protestant, he was dedicated to closing out the period in which Catholic Spain and Portugal had cornered the Japanese market. Under his guidance, the Dutch secured the exclusive rights to trade out of a port in Dejima, essentially removing it from Portuguese control. And English merchants gained the right to build houses in Japan and trade at their choice of ports and marketplaces. A permanent settlement was established for British merchants in Hirado. The Tokugawa Shogunate also brought relative peace to Japan after years of conflict between warring factions. This led to an explosion in culture and the arts, including the development of the ukiyo-e style that embraces hedonism and beauty. The word ukiyo roughly translates as floating world. referring to both the lightness and exhilaration of the moment, and the sadness that all such moments are fleeting. The kabuki and bunraku theatrical styles flourished in this time period, as did the production of distinctive woodblock prints. Unfortunately for Adams and his grand plans, actual trade between Japan and the English was slow to develop. His business's primary source of revenue was exchanging Chinese goods for Japanese silver, which was a much shorter trip than Japan to London. At one point, Adams also attempted to arrange expeditions to search for a rumored Northwest Passage from Asia to Europe, which would speed the timing of deliveries back and forth, but none of these ever got off the ground. Within 10 years, the English East Asia Company essentially withdrew from the Japanese market due to a lack of interest. Tokugawa Ieyasu died in 1616 at the age of 73, with his son Hidetada already long established as the formal shogun. He requested to be posthumously deified so he could protect his descendants from evil. Which box do you check to get that treatment? And he was renamed Tosho Daigongen, or Great Gongen, Light of the East, a Gongen being a kind of Buddha. Hidetada further cemented the Tokugawa's central role of authority by marrying Kazuko, the daughter of Emperor Go-Mizuno. Their daughter eventually took the throne as Empress Meisho. Every royal hierarchy is basically a soap opera. In 1618, Adams attempted to settle a conflict between Dutch and English merchants in Hirado. He appealed to the shogun, Hidetada, but did not receive any help, making it clear that his special relationship with the father held no sway with the son. During a trading expedition to Tonkin, in present-day Vietnam, he contracted a tropical disease. He finally succumbed in May 1620 in the Japanese city of Hirado and split his belongings between his English and Japanese families. By the time his inheritance reached London in 1622, his English wife, Mary Hine, had already passed away. Adams was not actually the last of his original crewmates in Japan at that point. Melchior von Santfort and Vincent Romain continued to live relatively quiet lives in Nagasaki. In 1635, Hidetada's successor, Shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu, announced the Sakoku Edict, which was intended to eradicate foreign influence from Japan, particularly Christianity. Japanese residents of mixed race, presumably including Adams's Japanese children, were then exiled to Jakarta, Indonesia. And who knows, maybe we'll get an acclaimed limited series about them next. So what do you think? What about the real Shogun story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.